12 Tiger tanks in 9 minutes. That claim lands on a desk at a forward airstrip in Normandy, August 1944, scrawled in pencil on a standard after-action form. The intelligence clerk, a second lieutenant whose job consists entirely of turning pilot claims into official numbers, reads it twice. He does not flag it. He does not send it back for correction. He logs it into the 19 Tactical Air Command's daily summary and moves to the next sheet in the stack. This is the part that should bother you. Not the claim itself. Pilots overclaim. Everyone knows that. The ratio runs somewhere between 2-to-1 and 4-to-1, depending on the theater and the week. What should bother you is that nobody in the intelligence section treated 12 Tigers in 9 minutes as extraordinary enough to question. The Falaise Gap in mid-August had broken every normal standard for what a single sortie could accomplish. The clerks had recalibrated. A claim that would have triggered an investigation in June went straight into the tally in August because the ground below those P-47s had become something no tactical air force had ever seen before. A kill box so dense with armor that missing seemed harder than hitting. The pilot's name does not survive in the sources I can find. The 19th TAC, Daily Intelligence Summaries for August 15th through 20th, 1944, record aggregate claims by squadron, sometimes by flight, rarely by individual. What survives is the number 12, and the time window. 9 minutes of actual firing passes over a road segment between Argentan and Chambois, where the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army were trying to push east through a corridor that shrank by the hour. If you're watching this, and you had family in the 371st Fighter Group, the 406th, the 362nd, any of the P-47 units flying out of Normandy that August, hit subscribe and tell me the unit in the comments. A like pushes this to more people who care about getting these stories right. Here is what makes 12 Tigers in 9 minutes physically implausible under normal conditions. A P-47 Thunderbolt carried 8 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets or 2 500-pound general-purpose bombs in a typical ground attack loadout. 5-inch HVARs against a Tiger's frontal armor do almost nothing. Against the engine deck from a steep dive angle, they can achieve a kill, but that requires a near vertical pass, pull-out at under 500 feet, and repositioning for another run. Each pass eats 30 to 45 seconds minimum. 12 kills in 9 minutes means a firing solution roughly every 45 seconds with no misses. The math collapses unless something about the tactical geometry changed the equation entirely. It did. The Falaise Pocket by August 17th had compressed 2 German armies, roughly 100,000 men and their vehicles, into a corridor less than 6 miles wide in places. The roads were not roads anymore. They were parking lots of burning vehicles, with live ones trapped between the wrecks. A Tiger tank requires a road width of roughly 12 feet. When the vehicle ahead burns and the vehicle behind burns, that Tiger sits still. It presents its thin top armor to the sky. It cannot traverse its turret fast enough to track a diving aircraft. It cannot reverse. The crew can bail out or die inside. Those are the options. Under these conditions, a pilot does not need to hit a moving target from a difficult angle. He needs to fly in a straight line over a column of stationary armor and pickle rockets sequentially. The geometry flips from nearly impossible to nearly trivial. The German experience of this, and this is what matters for understanding the claim, comes through in the foreign military studies reports written after the war. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, commanding Panzer Lehr's remnants in the pocket, described the air attacks as arriving in a continuous rotation with no interval between waves. His word, translated from the German in FMS B-840, is uninterrupted. He did not say overwhelming or devastating. He said uninterrupted. The distinction matters. Overwhelming implies a peak. Uninterrupted implies a system. To understand how one pilot could destroy 12 tanks in 9 minutes, you have to understand the system that put him over that road at that moment, with those weapons against targets that could not move. That system starts 6 months earlier and 3,000 miles west. By July 25th, 1944, the system already had a name: Operation Cobra. 1,500 B-17s and B-24s carpet-bombed a rectangle of Norman countryside, 3.5 miles wide and 1.5 miles deep west of Saint-Lô. The blast killed Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer killed by friendly fire in the entire war, along with over 100 GIs from the 30th Infantry Division caught under short drops. That detail irritates me more than it should, because McNair had come forward specifically to observe the bombardment's effectiveness. The bombs found him instead. But what walked through the gap those bombs opened changed the Western Front permanently. 3 armored divisions and 2 infantry divisions poured south. Patton's Third Army activated on August 1st and swung east. The speed of the breakout caught Schaff off guard. It caught the Germans off guard in a different way. General Feldmarschall Günther von Kluge, commanding Army Group B, faced a choice that had no good answer: pull back east toward the Seine and preserve his forces, or obey Hitler's direct order to counterattack west toward Avranches and cut off Patton's supply corridor at the coast. He obeyed the order. Operation Lüttich launched on August 7th with 4 panzer divisions aimed at Mortain. It gained 6 miles in the first 12 hours against the 30th Infantry Division, the same unit that had eaten American bombs 2 weeks earlier, now absorbing German armor. Then it stopped. P-47s from the 362nd Fighter Group hit the leading panzers at first light on August 8th. The counterattack stalled under continuous air attack for 3 days, while Patton's spearheads kept racing east, then north. Look at a map. By August 12th, the geometry becomes obvious. The British and Canadians push south from Caen toward Falaise. Patton's 15th Corps drives north toward Argentan. Between those two jaws sits the bulk of 2 German armies, 7th Army under Hausser, 5th Panzer Army under Eberbach, plus fragments of a dozen divisions chewed up since June. The pocket forms almost by accident, faster than Allied planners expected, because von Kluge's counterattack at Mortain had pushed his mobile reserves west, exactly the wrong direction. Every mile those panzers drove toward Avranches added a mile to their retreat east. The gap between Falaise and Argentan measured roughly 15 miles on August 13th. Canadian forces bogged down north of Falaise against the 12th SS Panzer Division, whose teenage soldiers fought with a fanaticism that slowed the northern jaw. The southern jaw stopped too. Patton's advance halted on Bradley's order at the Army Group boundary near Argentan. That decision has generated 60 years of argument. Bradley worried about a head-on collision between converging Allied forces. Patton wanted to close the trap. The gap stayed open. 15 miles. Then 12, then 8. German units streamed east through the corridor day and night, abandoning vehicles when fuel ran out, walking when vehicles broke down. Von Kluge disappeared for nearly 12 hours on August 15th, out of radio contact with OB West, his own headquarters. Allied intelligence thought he might be negotiating a surrender. The actual explanation appears to be simpler. His command car got strafed, his radio destroyed, and he spent the day in a ditch. Hitler replaced him with Walter Model on August 17th. By that date, the corridor measured less than 6 miles across at its narrowest point between Saint-Lambert-sur-Dive and Chambois. Every road and farm track and cattle path running east through that corridor carried German vehicles nose to tail. And above them, rotating in a cab rank system borrowed from the RAF and refined by 9th Air Force's 9th Tactical Air Command and 19th TAC, P-47s stacked at different altitudes, waiting for a forward air controller to assign them a road segment. The density defied precedent. Aerial reconnaissance photographs from August 18th show vehicles packed so tightly on the road between Trun and Chambois that individual tanks touch bumper to bumper for stretches of several hundred yards. A single 5-inch HVAR fired into that column cannot miss armor. It can only miss a specific vehicle. Post-war analysis by the Operational Research Section of 21st Army Group found fewer confirmed armor kills from air attack than the claims suggested. The overclaim ratio at Falaise ran high, possibly 6-to-1 for tanks specifically, but the analysis also noted something the raw kill numbers obscure. Crews abandoned intact vehicles under air attack. Tanks with full ammunition loads sat empty in the road because the men inside chose open ground over a steel box under rockets. The P-47 did not need to destroy every Tiger. It needed to make the crew believe staying inside meant burning alive. What could a P-47 actually do to a Tiger tank? The honest answer, supported by post-war ballistic testing and operational research, is almost nothing. Start with the 850 caliber M2 Browning machine guns mounted in the Thunderbolt's wings. Each gun fires roughly 800 rounds per minute. 8 guns together throw a combined 6,400 rounds per minute downrange, which sounds annihilating until you look at what those rounds hit. The Tiger's frontal plate ran 100 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor sloped at 10 degrees. The turret mantlet added another 120 millimeters in places. A 50 caliber armor-piercing M2 round penetrates roughly 19 millimeters of face-hardened steel at 300 yards. That means a P-47 unloading all 8 guns into a Tiger's front hull at combat range achieves exactly the same result as throwing gravel at a bank vault. The rounds spark and scar the paint. They do not penetrate. Ian Gooderson's detailed post-war analysis in Air Power at the Battlefront lays this out plainly enough to retire the myth of the 50 cal tank killer. His examination of British Operational Research Section reports and American ordnance testing concluded that machine gun fire from fighter bombers had essentially zero probability of destroying any German medium or heavy tank through armor penetration. Zero. Not low. Zero. The side armor offered slightly better odds, 80 millimeters on the Tiger's hull sides, still far beyond 50 cal penetration, at any angle a diving aircraft could realistically achieve. The engine deck presented thinner armor, roughly 25 to 40 millimeters, depending on the specific plate, and a bullet striking at near perpendicular angle during a steep dive could theoretically punch through. Theoretically. A pilot in a 7-ton fighter pulling 4 Gs at 300 miles per hour does not place individual rounds with surgical precision on a plate roughly 4 feet by 6 feet from a slant range that changes by 100 yards every second. The 50 cals could kill trucks, shred half-tracks, saw through the thin skin of self-propelled guns like the Marder or Westby. Against a Tiger, they killed the crew only if a man stood in the commander's hatch. So, the rockets. The 5-inch HVAR, high-velocity aircraft rocket, carried a warhead with roughly the explosive force of a 105 millimeter howitzer shell. That sounds promising. It is not. The HVAR's armor penetration against face-hardened plate reached roughly 3.5 inches under ideal conditions, a near-perpendicular hit on flat armor. Against the Tiger's frontal plate, at typical dive angles of 30 to 45 degrees, the round either ricocheted or detonated on the surface without penetrating. Gooderson's analysis of the Normandy data found that HVARs achieved a direct hit on an individual vehicle roughly 5% of the time under operational conditions, 5%. And a direct hit did not equal a kill. The rocket had to strike the right surface at the right angle to penetrate. The cumulative probability of a single HVAR destroying a Tiger tank from a standard 30-degree dive worked out to something in the neighborhood of 1 to 2% per rocket fired. A pilot carrying 8 rockets had perhaps a 15% chance of killing one Tiger on a full ordnance pass if every rocket aimed at the same vehicle. 12 Tigers would require a statistical miracle, roughly equivalent to flipping a coin heads 40 times consecutively. The 500-pound general-purpose bomb told a different story. A direct hit from a GP bomb killed anything. Tiger, Panther, King Tiger, concrete bunker. The blast overpressure alone cracked welds and blew hatches off within 15 feet of the impact point. But a GP bomb from a dive-bombing P-47 achieved a circular error, probable of roughly 100 feet under combat conditions. Against a single moving tank, that accuracy made a direct hit an event measured in single-digit percentages. General Major Rudolf von Gersdorf, Chief of Staff of 7th Army, stated in FMSA 894 that the bombs themselves caused less vehicle destruction than expected, but that the near misses cratered roads and created the blockages that trapped columns in place for subsequent attacks. The bombs made the road impassable, he wrote. The rockets and guns then destroyed what could not move. That quote contains the entire logic of Falaise from the air. The system did not need any single weapon to kill a tiger outright. It needed the weapons used in sequence: bombs to block, rockets and guns to set fires among the soft vehicles, then fire and smoke to force tank crews out of their hatches, away from their machines, into the open where strafing runs caught them on foot. The tiger did not die from a single blow. It died from the inability to move while blows kept falling. August 13, 1944. 10:14 a.m. local time. 37 P-47s of the 36th Fighter Group crossed the bomb line south of Argentan at 8,000 feet and find what no training exercise ever simulated. Below them, on a stretch of road running northeast from Rennes toward Écouché, sits a column of vehicles so long the lead flight commander cannot see its end. 800, maybe 1,000. The estimate varies by pilot because nobody can count that high from a cockpit while scanning for flak. The flight leader, Captain Robert Barkey, according to the 36th's mission summary for that date, rolls in first. His wingman follows 4 seconds later. Within 90 seconds, all 4 flights have committed to strafing runs, and the radio discipline dissolves into overlapping calls of target descriptions, pull-out altitudes, and one voice repeating, "They're everywhere," with an inflection the transcript cannot convey. The sound that reached the ground, and this matters for understanding what the Germans experienced, combined the Thunderbolt's Pratt and Whitney R2800 engine at full combat power, with 850 cals firing simultaneously. Luftwaffe veterans on the Eastern Front called the IL-2 Sturmovik the cement bomber for its heavy drone. The P-47 produced something sharper. A rising scream followed by a buzzing rip that lasted 2 to 3 seconds per pass. Then, the explosions walked down the column. German soldiers in Normandy called any Allied fighter bomber a Jabo, short for Jagdbomber, and the accounts collected in Shriver's The Crash of Ruin described the sound as arriving before the aircraft became visible. A high whine from behind a tree line, then the shadow crossing the road, then the hammering. Barkey's flight claimed 14 tanks destroyed on that single mission. The other 3 flights added another 23 tanks and 51 trucks between them. 37 pilots, 1 road, roughly 40 minutes of total time on station. The aggregate claim for the 36th Fighter Group on August 13th alone exceeded 60 armored vehicles destroyed. The 36th's intelligence officer compiled these numbers the same way every Tactical Air Command intelligence officer compiled them in 1944, from pilot debriefs conducted within an hour of landing. The pilot sits in a folding chair, still in his flight suit, sweat-soaked and buzzing with adrenaline, and a sergeant asks, "What did you hit?" The pilot answers from memory. He saw his rocket strike a vehicle. It caught fire. He calls it a tank. From 3,000 feet at 300 miles per hour in a 30-degree dive, a burning Opel Blitz 3-ton truck produces a column of black smoke indistinguishable from a burning Panzer IV. A half-track throwing ammunition cook-off looks exactly like a tank throwing ammunition cook-off. The pilot is not lying. He cannot tell. The American military's relationship with aerial overclaiming is worth examining at length because the institution knew it had a problem and chose not to fix it. The Army Air Forces had access to British Operational Research Section methodology, ground verification teams that walked the target area after an attack and counted actual wrecks by type. The RAF used this system in North Africa and refined it in Italy. The AAF adopted it sporadically, resisted it institutionally, and kept publishing pilot claims as primary metrics of tactical air effectiveness through the end of the war. The reason appears bureaucratic rather than deceptive. Corrected numbers produced smaller numbers. Smaller numbers justified smaller budgets. The Army Air Forces wanted independence from the Army, a goal achieved in 1947. And every downward revision of kill claims weakened the argument that air power alone could decide battles. So the inflated claims persisted in official reports, entered the historical record, and still circulate today as fact in popular accounts of the air war. Which brings us back to the 36th Fighter Group over that Norman road on August 13th, and the question those numbers actually raise. If the overclaim ratio at Falaise ran 6-1 for tanks, the figure from 21st Army Group's post-war analysis, then the 36th's 60-plus tank claims on August 13th translate to roughly 10 actual tank kills, still a significant number for a single group on a single day. But 10 is not 60. The gap between those numbers shaped everything that followed in the pocket, because 19 TAC headquarters received the 60 and planned the next day's operations, believing the German armor strength in the corridor had dropped by 60 vehicles. It had not. The columns reformed after dark. Crews returned to abandoned vehicles. Dawn revealed the road full again. On August 18th alone, 19 TAC claimed 1,300 vehicles destroyed or damaged and 45 tanks knocked out across the Falaise Pocket. One day. One command. That number entered the official record, crossed the wire to Chez F, appeared in stars and stripes, and landed on desks in Washington, where men who had never smelled cordite used it to justify the next fiscal year's aircraft procurement. Nobody in the chain had any incentive to make the number smaller. The inflation started in the cockpit and compounded at every level above it. A pilot pulls off a target trailing smoke from a vehicle he hit with 2 rockets. He reports 1 tank destroyed. His flight leader aggregates 4 pilots' claims and reports 4 tanks destroyed. The squadron intelligence officer combines 3 flights and reports 12 tanks destroyed. The group report reaches 19 TAC headquarters, showing 36 tanks destroyed across all squadrons that day. 19 TAC's daily summary rounds up, adds claims from groups whose reports arrived late, and publishes a figure that bears the same relationship to ground truth as a fish story bears to the actual fish. Each individual in the chain reported honestly, according to what he saw or received. The system produced fiction. Squadron competition accelerated the problem. The 406th Fighter Group and the 36th Fighter Group flew from adjacent airstrips in Normandy. Their ready rooms shared the same gossip network. When the 36th posted 60-plus armor kills on August 13th, the 406th's pilots flew the next morning, knowing the number to beat. This produced no conscious dishonesty, just a fractional shift in how a pilot interpreted ambiguous evidence. That smoking vehicle on the road, tank or truck. If the 36th called theirs tanks, the 406th pilot sees no reason to be conservative about his. Multiply that shift across 8 fighter groups operating in the pocket over 6 days, and the cumulative inflation becomes enormous. General Elwood Pete Quesada, commanding 9 TAC, understood the dynamic and tried intermittently to correct it. His staff developed a classification system: destroyed, probably destroyed, damaged, meant to impose rigor on pilot claims. It accomplished nothing measurable because probably destroyed never appeared in press releases and rarely survived the journey from tactical headquarters to theater-level summaries. The press wanted kills. So did Eisenhower's headquarters. The Army Air Force's case for post-war independence required them even more urgently. Probable kills served nobody's institutional purpose. The records from FMSB 728 offer a corrective from the receiving end. General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, commanding Panzerlehr Division, or what remained of it after Cobra, described losing more vehicles to fuel exhaustion and mechanical breakdown during the retreat than to air attack. His division entered the pocket with roughly 30 operational armored vehicles of all types. Allied air claims against Panzerlehr's sector during the pocket's closure exceeded 100 armored kills. "We lost everything," Bayerlein stated in his post-war interrogation, "but not all of it to bombs." The Americans claimed 3 times the division's total strength in armor kills from air alone. The missing vehicles existed only on debrief forms at forward airstrips in Normandy. The inflation was more than an accounting error. 19 TAC's inflated claims fed directly into operational planning. If headquarters believed 45 tanks destroyed on August 18th, it allocated fewer sorties to armor suppression on August 19th and redirected aircraft to interdiction targets deeper behind the lines. The actual German armor in the corridor, damaged, disorganized, but still present, received less pressure than the situation demanded. The claim machine created a feedback loop where success on paper reduced effort on the ground, which allowed real targets to survive, which produced more targets the following day, which generated more claims, which confirmed the original success. The system validated itself through its own failures. 9th Air Force's after-action report for August 1944 lists total vehicle claims in the Falaise area at over 3,000 destroyed and roughly 1,200 damaged. The 21st Army Group Ground Survey Team, walking the same roads 2 weeks later, counted a total of roughly 133 confirmed armored vehicle wrecks attributable to air attack across the entire pocket. 3,000 claimed, 133 confirmed. The ratio does not require commentary. But those 133 confirmed kills do not capture the vehicles abandoned intact under air pressure, the columns that never formed because pilots overhead made daylight movement suicidal, the fuel trucks that burned before their cargo reached a Panzer's fuel tank. The claim numbers lied about precision. They told a different truth about effect. A clipboard. Standard British Army issue. Wood backing. Steel clip oxidized brown from the Norman humidity. The officer carrying it walked the road between Chambois and Vimoutiers in early September 1944 with a pencil, a set of vehicle identification cards, and orders from 21st Army Group's Operational Research Section to count every wreck and determine what killed it. The smell hit first, not burning fuel. That had dissipated weeks earlier. The sweetness of decomposing horses. The Germans had moved entire divisions by horse-drawn transport through the pocket, and the animals died in rows along the road shoulders where strafing caught them in harness. Thousands of them. The operational research teams worked with handkerchiefs tied across their faces. One report notes the difficulty of examining vehicle undersides because the ground beneath the wrecks had turned to a slurry of ash, leaked fluids, and organic matter that the September rains had not yet washed into the drainage ditches. The men doing this work carried no weapons. They carried measuring tapes. Their methodology separated kills into categories by evidence. A vehicle with penetration holes in the armor and internal fire damage, air attack, cannon or machine gun. A vehicle with blast damage consistent with a near-miss crater, air attack, bomb. A vehicle with penetration from the side at a flat trajectory and no crater nearby, ground fire, anti-tank gun or tank. A vehicle intact but abandoned with fuel tanks empty, mechanical or logistical loss. A vehicle burned from the inside with no external penetration. Crew destruction, sometimes thermite grenades placed by the retreating Germans themselves to deny equipment. Each wreck got a card with a cause of death. The final numbers destroyed the claim. Across the entire Falaise Pocket, the area bounded roughly by Falaise, Argentan, Chambois, and Trun, the ground teams cataloged approximately 344 German armored vehicles of all types, tanks, assault guns, self-propelled artillery, armored cars. Of those 344, the survey attributed 33 to air attack by any method, bombs, rockets, cannon, machine gun combined. 33, against thousands of claimed kills from the air. Break it further. Of those 33, only 18 showed evidence of destruction by aircraft-delivered cannon or machine gun fire. 18 armored vehicles across roughly 13,000 Allied tactical air sorties flown over the pocket between August 12th and August 21st. The math produces a number so small it barely registers as a percentage. One confirmed machine gun or cannon kill per 722 sorties. The 50 caliber Browning and the 20mm Hispano cannon killed 18 tanks in 9 days of the most intensive tactical air campaign in the history of warfare to that date. Rockets performed marginally better in absolute terms, but not enough to salvage the narrative. Bombs accounted for most of the remaining 15 confirmed armor kills. The 500-pound GP bomb, the weapon Gersdorf identified as the roadblocker rather than the tank killer, did its damage primarily to soft-skinned vehicles, of which the survey counted over 1,000 destroyed across the pocket. Trucks, staff cars, ambulances, horse-drawn wagons, fuel bowsers. The Jobos annihilated the logistics train. The combat vehicles survived at rates that made the pilot claims look like fantasy. Look at those 18 confirmed kills against the backdrop of what the air campaign actually accomplished. The pocket closed. 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army lost the bulk of their equipment, not to destruction from the air, but to abandonment under air pressure. Crews who could not move by daylight left their vehicles and walked east at night. Tanks that ran dry sat where they stopped because the fuel trucks burned 10 kilometers behind them. The P-47 did not need to penetrate a Tiger's armor. Kill the truck carrying the Tiger's diesel, and the Tiger stops on its own. Crater the road, so the Tiger could not reach the crossroads before Canadian armor sealed the exit. Make the crew believe, correctly, that any movement under a clear sky invited attack within minutes. The operational research section reports use clinical language throughout. No drama. Column after column of vehicle types, grid references, damage assessments. One entry that sticks, a Tiger 1 at grid reference 632418, intact, full ammunition load, fuel gauge reading 1/4 full, abandoned, no battle damage of any kind. The crew walked away from a functional 57-ton tank because they could hear the Thunderbolt circling above the overcast and decided that surviving mattered more than fighting. Fewer than 100. That number covers the entire Normandy campaign, D-Day through the Seine crossing, 77 days of the most air-saturated battlefield in history, and it represents the total German armored vehicles confirmed destroyed by direct air attack across all sectors, all Allied air forces, all methods combined. Fewer than 100 out of roughly 1,500 German tanks and assault guns lost in France between June 6 and August 25, 1944. The other 1,400 died to artillery, anti-tank guns, tank-on-tank engagements, mines, mechanical failure, fuel starvation, and crew abandonment. Air power, the weapon the AAF claimed had revolutionized ground warfare, accounted for less than 7% of German armor losses in the campaign, where it enjoyed total supremacy. The Tiger number is worse. 13 Tigers confirmed destroyed by air attack in all of Normandy. 13. And 7 of those 13 died, not to fighter bombers, but to Bomber Command's carpet bombardment east of Caen during Operation Goodwood on July 18th. Heavy bombers dropping thousands of tons from altitude onto a fixed defensive position, not jabos hunting mobile columns. Strip Goodwood from the count, and 6 Tigers fell to tactical air attack across the entire campaign. 6 Tigers for every fighter-bomber sortie flown in France. The 362nd Fighter Group, the 406th, the 36th, the 56th, the 373rd, the 358th, the 365th, the 405th, all of them together, across thousands of missions, confirmed 6 Tiger kills from tactical air. The pilot who claimed 12 in 9 minutes claimed twice the entire theater's verified total for the full campaign. That fact alone should have triggered scrutiny. The intelligence officer who filed the report either did not know the context or did not care. The records do not indicate which. This irritates me more than it should, because the data existed. The British operational research teams produced preliminary reports within weeks of each major engagement. Goodwood's aftermath generated detailed wreck counts before the Falaise Pocket even formed. Anybody at 19th TAC or 9th Air Force Headquarters who wanted to cross-reference pilot claims against ground truth could have requested the ORS figures through 21st Army Group liaison channels. The mechanism existed. The reports circulated at staff level. The Air Force chose its own numbers instead, and those numbers entered histories written by officers who had built careers on them. General Quesada's post-war interviews emphasized the devastating effect of tactical air on German armor. He believed it, and so did his pilots, and so did the men on the ground who watched columns burn. Belief and evidence diverged at scale, and belief won because belief had stars on its collar. The German side confirms the split between destruction and effect with unusual consistency across multiple FMS reports. General der Panzertruppe Heinrich Eberbach, commanding 5th Panzer Army during the pocket's closure, stated in FMSB-8-40 that air attack destroyed relatively few of his tanks directly, but made coordinated movement impossible after sunrise. His word, impossible, appears 3 times in 2 pages. Eberbach distinguished carefully between vehicles lost to air attack and vehicles lost because of air attack. A tank abandoned on a road cratered by bombs that fell 200 meters ahead of it does not count as an air kill in the ORS methodology. It counts as abandoned. But without the bombs, that tank reaches the Seine crossing at Elbeuf and fights another week. The ORS numbers measured lethality. They could not measure paralysis. The American air campaign produced paralysis at industrial scale, and the claim machine obscured that genuine achievement behind fake precision about individual kills. The real story, that American air power made the Wehrmacht unable to function as a modern army in daylight, needed no inflation. The truth sufficed. Nobody told it straight, because the truth required admitting that fighter bombers could not reliably kill tanks, and that admission threatened procurement lines for aircraft the Air Force wanted to keep building. So 12 Tigers in 9 minutes stayed in the file, a number that would have represented nearly twice the tactical air total, for all of France sat unchallenged in an intelligence summary at a forward airstrip, got mentioned in unit histories, surfaced in magazine articles decades later, and accumulated the weight of repetition until it felt like fact. The pilot who wrote it on that form did not commit fraud. He committed the same honest error every other pilot in Normandy committed, multiplied by the adrenaline of the most target-rich environment any American aviator had ever seen: a fuel canister. Standard Wehrmacht 20-liter Einheitskanister, the jerrycan the Allies admired enough to copy. This one sat empty in a ditch outside Briouze, punctured twice through the side by 50-caliber rounds that left entry holes the diameter of a man's thumb. 20 liters of gasoline bled into the Norman soil. Multiply that canister by every fuel truck, every horse-drawn supply wagon, every depot within 30 kilometers of the Pocket's eastern exits, and you begin to see what the Jabos actually did to the German army in August 1944. They starved it, not of food, though that failed too, of movement itself. General Major Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorf, Chief of Staff of 7th Army, produced one of the most detailed FMS accounts of the collapse. His report, FMSA 918, describes a military organization that ceased to function as a coordinated force, not because its units suffered annihilation from above, but because the connective tissue between those units dissolved under continuous air pressure. Supply columns that required 4 hours to cover 40 kilometers by night needed those same 4 hours to cover 8 kilometers by day, if they moved at all. Most did not. Drivers who attempted daylight runs learned the cost inside the first kilometer. The sound preceded the attack, a low drone rising to a snarl as the Thunderbolt's Pratt and Whitney R2800 doubled in pitch during the dive. Gersdorf's staff officers reported that experienced drivers would abandon vehicles at the first hint of engine noise overhead, sprinting for tree cover while the truck still rolled. The vehicles often survived. The schedule never did. Concentration became impossible. A panzer division's combat power depends on massing tanks, infantry, artillery, and engineers at a single point. That requires moving all 4 elements to the same grid square within the same window. Eberbach tried to assemble a counterattack force from 2nd SS Panzer Division and elements of the 9th and 10th SS on August 14th. The tanks arrived piecemeal across 36 hours because no 2 companies could use the same road simultaneously without creating the kind of traffic density that attracted Jabos within minutes. Artillery batteries displaced 1 gun at a time. Infantry marched through orchards in single file. The counterattack launched with roughly a third of its intended strength, 12 hours behind schedule, into positions the Americans had already reinforced. Air attack destroyed perhaps 2 of Eberbach's tanks that day. Air presence prevented the other 40 from reaching the start line. Radio discipline collapsed next. Panzer crews who could not see friendly units through the hedgerows transmitted in the clear to establish contact, and American signals intelligence, operating from positions close enough to the front that operators could hear the artillery they were directing, fed those intercepts to the Jabo controllers orbiting overhead. A transmission requesting fuel resupply at a crossroads became a target designation within minutes. The FMS reports do not say how many German radio operators understood that their own transmissions were guiding the attacks. Sources conflict on whether 7th Army's signal staff issued a formal warning about this vulnerability before August 16th or after. The psychological effect compounded the material damage in ways no survey team could catalog. Bayerlein described soldiers in Panzer Lehr who refused to ride on tanks during daylight movement. They walked alongside instead, ready to scatter. Tank commanders rode with hatches open and eyes on the sky rather than closed up and scanning for ground threats, which meant they entered engagements against Allied armor already compromised, already looking the wrong direction. Lieutenant Martin Gross of the 2nd Panzer Division wrote in a letter recovered post-war that his men slept during the day and moved at night like rats in a burning building, always smelling for the next fire. The Jabos did not need to find his platoon. His platoon assumed they already had. This produced the outcome that mattered more than any kill count. By August 19th, 7th Army existed as a headquarters issuing orders to units that could not execute them, supplied by a logistics chain that functioned only in darkness, communicating through a radio network that fed intelligence to the enemy. The Army did not die in the pocket. It froze. Tens of thousands of soldiers walked east through the gap at Chambois, carrying personal weapons and nothing else. No vehicles, no heavy weapons, no ammunition reserves, no organizational coherence. They crossed the Seine as individuals. The American air arm over Normandy killed fewer tanks than it claimed by a factor of 30. It killed an army's ability to fight as an army. Gersdorff's summary in A918 reaches for the right word and settles on Lähmung, paralysis. The form smelled like aviation fuel. Everything at a forward airstrip in Normandy smelled like aviation fuel. The paper, the canvas, the food, the blankets. The pilot filled it out with a pencil stub, still wearing his Mae West, sweat cooling on his neck in the August heat. 12 Tiger tanks destroyed. 9 minutes. He handed it to the intelligence officer, walked to the mess tent, and ate powdered eggs from a tin plate. The form went into a folder. The folder went into a filing cabinet. The filing cabinet went into a unit history. The unit history went into a book. The book went into a YouTube thumbnail with a Thunderbolt diving through orange flames and a title in block capitals. 80 years of repetition, and nobody checked the math. Why did it persist? Start with institutional incentive. The Army Air Forces separated from the Army in 1947 to become the United States Air Force. That separation required a political argument, that air power constituted a decisive independent arm, not a support branch for ground commanders. Every confirmed tank kill bolstered the case. Every inflated claim file became evidence in a budget hearing. The men writing the post-war official histories, Craven and Cate's 7-volume series, published through the 1950s, drew from wartime records compiled by officers who had no reason to discount their own pilots' reports and strong reasons not to. The British ORS data sat in separate archives under separate classification. Nobody merged the two streams because merging them would have produced an uncomfortable answer, and uncomfortable answers do not secure appropriations. Then came the popular histories. Martin Blumenson's 1961 account of the breakout uses pilot claims without systematic correction. Carlo d'Este follows the same pattern. Max Hastings adds caveats that most readers skip but leaves the core numbers intact. The 12 Tigers claim or variants of it surface in coffee table books about the P-47, in aviation history magazine articles from the 1990s, in documentary narration, recorded over gun camera footage that shows trucks burning but gets captioned as tanks dying. Each repetition strips away another layer of context until the raw number stands alone. 12 Tigers, 9 minutes, 1 pilot, as a fact so clean it resists questioning. Who wants to question it? Americans built the Thunderbolt, trained the pilot, established the air supremacy that put him over that road. The claim flatters. The truth requires more sentences to explain. On the internet, flattery travels faster than explanation, by a ratio that probably mirrors the overclaim factor itself. The German testimony that actually validates American air supremacy gets buried under the sexier narrative: Gersdorf's Lähmung, Eberbach's three uses of impossible, Bayerlein's admission that Panzerlehr ceased to exist as a fighting formation under air pressure alone. These statements, written by professional soldiers with no incentive to exaggerate American capabilities and strong incentive to blame their own defeat on overwhelming material superiority rather than tactical failure, constitute hostile witness validation of the most dominant air campaign any nation has ever conducted over a ground battle. A German general telling his American captors that air power alone paralyzed an entire army carries more evidentiary weight than 1,000 pilot claim forms. But Gersdorf's clinical prose does not fit a thumbnail. 12 Tigers does. The real number, fewer than 100 armored vehicles confirmed destroyed by air across all of Normandy, measures the wrong thing. It measures holes in steel. The American achievement at Falaise had nothing to do with holes in steel. It had to do with a system so vast and so relentless, so continuously present over the battlefield, that a 57-ton Tiger with ammunition in the rack and fuel in the tank sat abandoned at a Norman crossroads because its crew heard radial engines above the clouds and chose to walk. No other nation on Earth could have produced that effect in 1944. The British Typhoons shared the sky, but not the depth of the logistics chain behind them. The Soviet Il-2 operated in comparable numbers, but never achieved the sortie rates or the maintenance turnaround. The United States put more aircraft over more roads for more hours per day than any air force in history, and it did so while simultaneously supplying those aircraft with fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and replacement pilots at rates the Luftwaffe could not have matched in its best year. The pilot who wrote 12 Tigers on that form climbed back into his Thunderbolt the next morning, flew 4 more sorties before lunch, and filed 4 more reports.